It's a real special night for me tonight. Get my friend Jesse coming on. Jesse and I know each other from CrossFit back in the day, and then I've had some actual somewhat serious conversations now and again. I learned that he does amazing work. I mean, does amazing work with young people in Roxbury and has for years. We've chatted from time to time on particularly what he sees in his male students. And so I'm really, really looking forward to hearing what Jesse has to say. So the floor is yours, Jesse. You can go to 8:30 or you can stop earlier than that if you don't feel like talking that long, but fire away. I'm going to pin you so I don't have to look at myself.
Okay, it's okay for me to share screen.
Yeah, do whatever you want.
Okay. Oh, I think you have to give me permission.
Oh yeah, I do have to do that. Hold on a second. I'm like scrambling around because I'm on my laptop, which is, hold on. There we go. Smaller. Can you see it now?
Yep, good. All good. All right, I'll jump in. Thanks for having me, Tom, and good to meet everybody. I would not subject you to half an hour of me talking, so I'll probably say a little bit, but you should absolutely jump in along the way, or hopefully there is some time for back and forth at Q&A. Tom asked me to talk about just sort of what I'm seeing with boys and young men in education. So I'll do a little bit. I am no expert, but I have done this for about 30 years, so can share a few thoughts. I'll spare you the long story. I taught middle and high school math for 10 years in Boston. The last school I taught at, I helped start a charter school. In the first class of charter schools, if you're not in education, basically the thing to know about those schools is they are publicly funded schools, but they're essentially privately run by not privately by a corporation, but privately by a board, and kind of run outside the system on the theory that a lot of urban education is pretty broken, and maybe there's some better ways to do it, and we should allow for some innovation. Then I started a teacher training program, which basically borrowed from the medical residency model to train new teachers for Boston. Teacher preparation is pretty broken as well. You have a lot of folks who come into that who end up not teaching at all or quit really soon. And so we have a kind of broken front end of the education pipeline there. So I spent about 10 years doing that. And the last 10 years, I've spent starting and running a couple schools in Boston that form a K-12 pathway. So I'll talk a little bit about that and use that as sort of backdrop for the conversation. I hope you'll interrupt as we go. I'm just trying to share my screen. But of course, let's see.
Do you see the option?
Yeah, it's just it's giving me a hard time. But I got it now. Sorry, it's asking for a password, of course.
I don't have your password.
Let's try this one more time.
Wow.
Sorry. Well, other than this, all right, can you see that okay?
No.
No, crap. You're not seeing anything?
Are you guys seeing something?
I'm not.
Just
No,
a black
no.
screen.
All right. Hey, Tom, are you
You want to email me something?
yeah.
All right.
How's that?
That's better. That worked.
Okay. Got it. All right. Sorry about that. So I'm going to I will not bore you with too many stats, but I'll give you a little bit of context just about boys and education. So, in no particular order. So as you can see here, in 1970, 12% of young women had a bachelor's degree compared to 20% gap. So there was an 8% gap favoring men. 50 years later, that 12% had turned into 41% for women, but only 32% for men. So you can see a pretty large change in college access and attainment. There are currently 1.6 million more young women with bachelor's degrees than men. You can see there's a 6.5% gap in high school graduation as well, which ends up being a pretty big deal. Girls outperform boys in reading by more than 40% of a grade level in every state across the country. In 10 states, that's more than a full grade level. Math tends to be more even. So this is really, we're seeing this much more in reading than math, but it's still a fairly big deal. And I just wrote this word intersectionality at the bottom just because, the thing, Tom had asked me to come talk about boys and men. The schools I've worked in a city like Boston, our schools are, 97, 98% kids of color, almost all African-American, Latinx. So there's a lot that crosses race and gender. So I haven't, not everything is, I won't break out race every time, but just know that that's kind of at the backdrop of some of what we're talking about. And quite honestly, I'm generalizing, but the situation for Black boys and Black men in the country is obviously very different than for a lot of white boys and white men. And I'll give you a couple stats on that. You can see that income is still, the gap is still the other way, right? At every level of education, men out earn women. That is changing, but that is still the current context. So you see this sort of beginning set of changes at the education level, which has not yet completely made its way through income, but there's some sense that is changing at the income level. This is a lot where some of the race and gender stuff comes together, but incarceration is a huge issue. You can see some of these stats. 1,500 Black prisoners for every 100,000 Black adults, which, as you can see there, is twice the rate for Hispanics and more than 5 times the rate for whites. Black folks represent 33% of people in prison, which is roughly, triple the 12% share of the US adult population. Whites are about 30%, so they're about half when compared to the adult share of whites, and Hispanics are 23% compared to 16% of the adult population. Interesting enough that, the rate for women of all races is much lower. I mean, you look at 1,500 Black prisoners for every 100,000 Black adults compared to, 62 for women, but that the female incarcerated population stands over 6 times higher than in 1980, right? So in that last less than 45 years, that has grown dramatically. So there's a huge incarceration issue, especially in urban areas. And just because we'll get into boys, in a second, almost 60% of imprisoned women have a child under the age of 18. So you think about kids not having moms and dads at home. This is a big issue. So probably don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the stats. I figured you'd be more interested in talking about kind of what's going on and why. I will start by saying, so many explanations and so much that you see and hear basically pathologizes young men and young men of color. And so my effort here is what I'll try to do is talk a little bit about what's going on without pathologizing kids. And so I actually included 2 Ta-Nehisi Coates quotations in here. I won't read this whole one, but I find him compelling and thought this might be of interest. This was written obviously after some of the recent murders of young Black boys, so I'll just read a bit of it. Always remember that Trayvon Martin was a boy, that Tamir Rice was a particular boy, that Jordan Davis was a boy like you. When you hear these names, think of all the wealth poured into them. Think of the gasoline expended, the treads worn carting him to football games, basketball tournaments, and Little League. Think of the time spent regulating sleepovers. Think of the surprise birthday parties, the daycare, and the reference checks on babysitters. Think of checks written for family photos. Think of soccer ball, science kits, chemistry sets, racetracks, model trains. Think of all the embraces, all the private jokes, customs, greetings, names, dreams, all the shared knowledge and capacity of a Black family injected into that vessel of flesh and bone. And think of how that vessel was taken, shattered on the concrete, and all its holy contents, all that had gone into each of them, was sent flowing back to the earth. So what's going on? Why are we seeing this? This is by no means an exhaustive list, but I thought we'd spend a little bit of time on this page. There's some things that I think I've seen going on. First thing I'd say is, and obviously, forgive the generalization, but schools really are not built for boys. I'll try to bring a couple kids into this conversation. There's a first grade class that I work in now. I spend an hour a week in there. It's not actually my job, because my job is to be executive director of this organization, but it just gives me my fix for kids. And there's probably 5 or 6 boys, and in a class of 24 kids that are just the percentage of time that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing is quite low, as you might imagine. And you may have seen this. You may have been one of these boys. You may have raised boys like these. You may know boys like these. They're not bad. They're not doing anything awful, but literally the idea that they can come to school and sit still and do what the teacher tells them for 6 hours, they can barely do this for 6 minutes, never mind for 60 minutes or 6 hours. And so they're just constantly getting in trouble or being redirected, and the level of education that they're getting is minimal. And I've been working closely with this boy Chiron, and he's just, without knowing any of you would all love this kid, right? Like he's brilliant, he's energetic, he wants to play around, but like if I'm sitting there and I give him tasks in 2-minute chunks, like take my phone out, I set the timer for 2 minutes, like we're going to do for math for 2 minutes, and then we're going to take a break and we're going to kick the ball around for 60 seconds. And like, if I don't plan it out at that level of detail with like literally increments of 2 to 3 minutes, we've lost it, right? And he's getting in trouble, he's getting kicked out of class, et cetera. And so, the ratio of teachers to kids like that is unfortunately off, right? And so you have one teacher in a class, and it's very hard to control that. And the problem is, and this isn't just Black and Latinx boys, but a lot of it is, right? When they're in first grade, they're cute and everybody thinks they're cute. But as those kids grow up and get bigger and start growing facial hair, and people get afraid of them. And many of the teachers, especially in elementary schools, but middle and high schools too, still are white women. I'll come back to this, but there's a real mismatch between who the teachers are and who the students are. And so then you end up in the situation of women, and often white women, being afraid of, I shouldn't say it's all about fear, but it comes down to that sometimes, Black boys, Latinx boys that are getting bigger and bigger. And so that stuff that's kind of cute and funny when they're in kindergarten or first grade grows up and becomes a real problem. This has been worsened in from my experience, and from seeing it in schools and from talking to a lot of folks in schools over the pandemic. You have, a couple of years of kids going through critical developmental time, not being in schools, not getting the kind of feedback and support they need, and then kind of being thrown back in schools. And so many of the things that we saw 5 years ago, we're still seeing, but they're worse. Boys are overrepresented in special education. When I started teaching, when I started the teacher training program, I'd go from school to school, and often you see boys in sub-separate classes. It's not that they have to be in the middle of the building with no windows, but it often felt like you'd see 6 or 7 boys, often boys of color, with one teacher in a small room, no windows, kind of almost being held there, right? And so often when kids aren't being successful in regular education, we quickly refer them to special education. Those kids might have then much worse outcomes in terms of success in schools, completion of schools, et cetera. And I think overall there's just a kind of barrier of low expectations that we see. The second thing I want to talk about is just sort of lack of role models and mentors. I sort of referred to this before. Teaching is a feminized profession. The number of women are much higher than the number of men. In Boston, I started this teacher training program about 20 years ago. And at that point, 86% of the kids were kids of color, and under 20% of the teachers were teachers of color. So again, you just have this big mismatch. And we've worked really hard to make sure that all of our classes have at least 50% teachers of color, but the district continues to lose lots of numbers of teachers of color, is not retaining them. And so we're still struggling with this. And so you end up with boys, and again, at the fear of pathologizing, lots of boys have amazing dads at home, but some don't have a dad at home. Some have a dad who's incarcerated. Some have a dad who's gone or who has been killed or whatever. And so those kids are looking for role models. At our elementary school, it's not a small school, it's 300 kids. The principal is a Black man, and there are 5 other men of color there, which honestly, I have not been in an elementary school in the city that has 6 men of color in one building. And it's just, it's the kind of stuff that probably every kid wants and needs, and we're just not providing at scale. So that's a huge thing. The third thing I'll talk about is just kind of pressures and challenges outside of school, especially as kids are getting older. There's a need to work. You see young men who have responsibility in their family, and they're choosing oftentimes between going to school and working. That got a lot worse in the pandemic, when we would just see kids like, at Dunkin' Donuts at 10 in the morning because they could, right? And so now their family depends on the income. I think related to that is a sort of this questioning of higher education, and that may not be across the income spectrum, but certainly for poor kids, I think there's a real question about the relevance of higher education. And, if I'm going to go into higher education, I'm going to take out all these loans. Those are going to be years when I can't be contributing to my family. And really, how relevant is it? And actually, is it a good economic decision for my family? So you see a de-emphasis on kids going into post-secondary options. And there are a number of other influences like that. It makes me think, there's a kid that I taught when I was one of the first kids I taught in Boston when I was teaching high school. This was a kid who was like, he was at least I'm 6'2". He was my height. He was a boxer. He was a big kid. He'd come to the States from Jamaica maybe 5 years before. But one of these gentle giant types, really quiet, nice kid. And one day I found out he got suspended, and I was like, dude, what the hell you got suspended for? Oh, they found a gun that he buried outside in the bushes. And I'm like, what the hell? Why would you bury a gun out in the bushes? So the kid had to go to work after school. It was just him and his dad. Works at the mall. The only way he can get home is a bus that drops him off a mile from his house. In order to be able to get home, he has to walk through a neighborhood of kids who are out to get him. So he brings the gun to school in the morning so that he can pick it up after school, so he can take it to the mall to work, so that when he gets off the bus at midnight and has to walk a mile home, he can protect himself against kids, right? And it's like, the number of stories like that are just, I don't know about you all. I've never had to do that. So I've never had to like bury a gun outside school to be able to protect myself. And so you meet a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid who's dealing with like that kind of that pressure and those kinds of issues. And you just have a number of kids who are balancing life circumstances like that. I promised in my last Ta-Nehisi Coates thing, he wrote this book, which if you haven't read, I recommend. And it's basically a letter to his 15-year-old son. And he says, when I was your age, fully 1/3 of my brain was concerned with whom I was walking to school with, our precise number, the manner of our walk, the number of times I smiled, whom or what I smiled at, who offered a pound and who did not, all of which to say that I practiced the culture of the streets, culture concerned chiefly with securing the body. And I guess I would maybe just sort of end with that thought of like, if you just think about how much time and attention you have to spend, often for a boy growing up now, on thinking about your own security and safety and everything you do, who you look at and talk to in school, how you maneuver the city, the kinds of choices you make about what you do before and after school. And I think that's what Coates is describing. And so that's what I think that's a relevant thing, just in the number of kids who are dealing with that on a day-to-day basis. Let me stop there. Tom, you said no Q&A, but was that for the second part? Can I open it up a little bit? And just
Yeah. Why don't we do this? Why don't we have a little Q&A for now, and I'll keep recording for that, and then I'll shut it down, and then we'll let people talk. How's that? I mean, I'll ask a question. So when we talked, you were saying that your goal is no longer higher education at all. It's really about employment. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So education has all these proxies that they measure, right? Like we measure test scores and we measure attendance rates. And the problem is that you find that these are things set up by the education system, but you could pass the state test, which allows you to graduate high school, but there's no real correlation between that and success later on. So we've decided that the goal that we're going to go after is every student in a purposeful wealth building career 6 years after the day they graduate high school. And what that lets them do is say, like, hey, if I want to go to four-year school, the high school we run is a STEM school. It has three pathways. One's computer science, one's engineering, advanced manufacturing, and one's health and life sciences. And we chose those sort of loosely mapped backward from labor market demand in the city. And we've really just come to start to try to think about wealth creation, you know, and the notion that I'm sure it's something that we all on this call think about, right? But it's like, how do you help young people who are coming from backgrounds of poverty, often are immigrants, et cetera, often supporting other people in their family? How do you help them start to do more than just get by? And so it's not, you know, it's not that we're anti-higher education. It's just that for some students, a four-year school or, you know, a master's or whatever is the right way. Other kids, it's a two-year school. Other kids, it's a training program. There are all different kinds of routes. And we try to support them to be, you know, as rational as possible at the economic trade-offs, to choose a program that's going to help them get there. And then we surround them for the next 6 years. We don't let them go when they graduate high school, because so often what happens is a kid will go off to school, then mom gets sick, and you know, when they come home for 3 weeks and suddenly they flunked out that semester and now they're $25,000 in debt, and the school won't let them back in until they can pay that money to continue, right? So they have a couple of years in, but they have nothing to show for it. So we're trying to figure out all the different ways we need to support kids as they get older. Oftentimes they fall off for a little while, and it's just about getting them back on. And I don't have a better analogy than this, but it's like, you know, it's like having a dad or a grandpa or someone who's like there to lend you $100 when you need it, or, you know, give you a kick in the ass when you need it, whatever it is you need, right? Or like make a call and get you an interview when you need one. And, you know, not everybody has those things. And so it's like, can we be, I don't know, can we be the grandpa in some way who can do some of that stuff?
Anyone else have a question before we go to sharing? Go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, Jesse, thanks for your share. I was just curious, of the boys that you work with, have you been able to determine like any themes, you know, of boys that have been able to transcend all these circumstances? Like, is there some common denominator that some people are able to kind of hit that 6-year goal versus others?
That's a great question. I think, and I did not do a good job of this, so I should have, but I think, you know, to the thing I was saying of not pathologizing the kids, so many students come in with like, just, you know, I don't know, you hear employers these days talk about soft skills, right? And like grit and perseverance and stuff like that. So many kids have those in, you know, in amazing, just in spades, right? Like these are kids who really have shown a lot of those things. And so I think one of the things is we have some young people, and we try to support them, who are really good at or get good at understanding that about themselves, and are able to see some of the things they've accomplished as assets rather than as deficits, so that they walk in with that. I think another thing that we've tried to support that is, you know, is not something that's often taught in school, but I think is essential is, you know, for lack of a better word, is like networking, right? It's the idea that you're not just going to pass a set of academic barriers, but you're building a social capital, you're building a network as you go. And if you're not someone kind of born into that kind of network, how do you build that artificially? And students can do that, but we think it needs to be taught explicitly. So I think there are kids who are really bringing a set of skills and are able to build on those and see them as assets. The last thing I'd say is, and you know, some kids quite honestly come good at this, and other kids have to learn it. They have to be border crossers. You know what I mean? They have to be able to walk into their neighborhood and speak a certain way and get by, and then they have to be able to go downtown, and they just have to, you know, it's code switching, right? They have to be able to do that kind of code switching. And as they learn to do that and get really expert at that, and again, see that as an asset, almost like being bilingual. But you probably all see this in your day-to-day jobs and stuff like that. So often the kind of technical stuff, a lot of that stuff, the company will tell us, like, we can teach them that stuff. You get us the person who like wants to be here and is going to work hard and get, you know, so it's a lot of times it's getting in the door. And oftentimes it's those kind of soft skills that are the differentiator.
Anybody else? One more question before we go to Sean? Anybody? I'll ask one more question. One thing I've been thinking about a lot, Jesse, and I know this is maybe putting you on the spot, but particularly for the boys, you know, do you think there's any value in creating a class that would allow the boys to focus on what it means to be a man?
We tell me if this helps. We have a program in our school, which is not a program we started. This program started in Chicago, called Becoming a Man, and it's an organization, like I said, started and grown in Chicago, and then it's expanding across the country. And it's essentially that it's led. I don't know if it's always led by a Black or Latinx man, but every time I have seen it, it has been. And essentially has a curriculum about becoming a man, and it's about creating, you know, a safe space for boys and young men to come together, talk about some of the stuff they're facing. There's a set of values. They've actually just started a kind of a sister group. I think it's called WOW, like something about becoming a woman, and very much based on the same thing. It's incredibly powerful. It has great results, especially when matched with particular academic interventions. So that's a long-winded way of saying yes, and I'd be happy to like send you more stuff or connect you with someone
Yeah,
there.
definitely. I mean, super interested in that. Okay.
Hey,
All right. Go ahead.
one last quick question. I think you touched on it and brushed by it a little bit. This idea that a lot of these kids are growing up having to depend on their own code switching and ability to survive in their neighborhood, multiple neighborhoods, et cetera, and depending only on themselves. And yet, as we recognize with a little experience and maturity, that the network and the ability to ask for help and put people together to create, you know, a collaborative, a collective that could bolster each other, is sort of the key to success in at least many of our experiences. Is that something that you've seen, that these boys are having difficulty doing that because that they're just sort of searching for that soul survival alpha male, you know, I'll die
Yeah, no.
trying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's a great question, and I think it is to your point. I think it is for a lot of students who are successful. That's exactly what they're doing. I mean, I guess, and this will be a little cliche. You know, I think for some kids, to your point, most kids I know are looking for that. I think some kids are looking for it in the wrong places. So, right, it's how am I finding support and you know, acknowledgement, and am I finding it for doing good things that are going to lead me in the right way, or not so good things? And so we you know, you see a lot of people reaching out for that, and you see that leading some people in a really good direction and others not so much. But I think your question is right on, and I think that is what we are trying to build for everyone. And this sounds a little like business schooly or anything like that, but you know, I don't know if you've all read the book Nudge, but it's you know, I think it's this notion of thinking about what the default is. And so to take what you described and really make that the default for kids is there will be a set of opportunities to network and work together and those kinds of things, and just make that's the norm. And you almost have to opt out of that, rather than to be like, you have to get really lucky or make a whole bunch of good choices to get that. And it's that notion of kind of changing the default to be a system more like you described, rather than have that be something that's so hard to kind of scramble for.
Appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to cut it off there. And Jesse, thanks so much. That was awesome. So I'm going to turn this off.